We press on as fast as we can for the next 2 nights. Finally, as dawn approaches on the 10th day, a darkness can be seen on the horizon to the north. The coming of daylight sees us taking shelter in the shade of an overhanging cliff, the red face soaring out of the dunes to 100 meters above us. There's been no further contact with the nomads, although occasionally one of us thinks we have glimpsed shapes in the distance, either ahead or behind us. We find a small cave, half filled with sand and dust, at the foot of the cliff, and we dig our way in. We find ourselves in a spacious cavern, high enough to stand in and 20 meters across at its broadest. While the others make camp, the colonel asks Ohebs and me to join him. Leaving the cave, we make our way along the cliff until it descends on a ridge that we can climb up. With thick boots and gloved hands, the climb isn't easy, but we eventually make it to the top. From here, we can see kilometers around over the layer of dust fog that sweeps across the waste below. And there, about 20 kilometers away, we can see the Hades Archean highway as it cuts across the wastes on high pillars. It is like a ribbon of gray against the orange and red. And slightly to the east, Avernus Forge sprawls out to the dunes and hills, a black, oily cloud of soot hanging above it. It looks like Infernus Forge, only much more intact. Chimney stacks, hundreds of meters high, pierce the dark cloud, and a tangle of dome-roofed Mechanicus factory temples radiate from the large, slab-sided structure at the center. It's impossible to make out any more detail from this distance. The smoking remnants of a gargant, 70 meters of ruptured metal plates and jutting many-barreled cannons, stand a few kilometers from the complex. There are swarms of movement around its base, although it's impossible to make out any details through the dust cloud kicked up. It's obvious the orcs are there in force. Flickers of light from the forges are accompanied by a few seconds later with tiny, distant thumps of heavy gunfire. Ohebs points to the west of the forge, and there we can see shadowy shapes of two battle titans, warlord cat class, I'd guess, by their size. They are standing watch over the industrial complex. Like huge sentinels, 60 meters tall, they stand immobile, their giant plasma reactors dormant, and their huge weapons silent. A column of vehicles, tanks, and personnel carriers is making its way along the highway in front of the nearest Titan. They look like toys compared to the armored Titans. Each is smaller than its head. I can't imagine the crew in the carrier manning their stations, waiting for the order to unleash the destructive potential of their war machine. Pulling out his map, the colonel fumbles in his pocket. He produces a short pencil and makes a few notes on the map before passing it to Ohebs. I look over his shoulder as he traces a route under the highway west of Avernus, around the end of the orc lines, and then into the complex itself. The colonel nods, takes the map, and folds it. We head back down the ridge to rejoin the others. I don't know what it was talking about when they was talking about the Titan's crew and their carriers. I don't know what that means. I don't know what a Titan crew carrier is. I wasn't aware that there was specifically a carrying device. I have no idea. I read that correctly though. I don't sleep at all that day. Thinking about ash waste nomads finding us and knowing that a battle rage is so close, we can hear the occasional explosion. We're going to have to sneak into Avernus, and the battle may turn out to work in our favor. Nobody's going to give a squad a second thought as it hurries through the half-ruined complex. There, all the troops are sprung all over the place. The only concern is that we don't get too caught up in the fighting itself. As day turns to night, the dark sky is once again lit by detonations and muzzle flashes. We cut across the waste towards Avernus. Our progress is slower than normal as we make sure we don't run into anything unexpectedly. Myself, Laurie, and Finn each make regular forays up ahead to scout any enemy positions. There's nothing for the first hour. The noise of the orc attack is loud now. It's only a few kilometers away. We start to skirt west, away from the brightness of the battlefield. As we get closer, we can see lights from vehicles that move along the highway. They are the tanks and supply convoys that reinforce Avernus from the other fronts. We pass under the highway itself, between the huge supporting struts, and climb over mounds of debris and wrecks of vehicles. The rockery pillars are pocketed with shell craters and bullet holes, and the tangled ruins of the combatants stretch out of sight and to the left, testimony to the battles fought for control of the road. We hear odd noises over the rumbling of vehicles above, the sound of scratching on metal, the skitter of a dislodged stone down a rubble pile. There are odd glimpses of movement in the gloom. They are probably just desert rats or solitary scavengers picking an existence from the ruin of war. Whatever it is, it knows better than to face us. As we clear the tangled wreckage, we make a quick sweep behind us, which reveals nobody following. 2 kilometers ahead and to the east lie the outlying buildings of the forge complex. Its smokestacks jut from the roofs. Billowing fumes and the glow of forges and furnaces spills out from the shattered windows and shuttered doors. With jets roaring above us and tracer fire crossing the sky, we sneak into Avernus, cutting our way through a battered mesh fence that surrounds a windowless building on the outskirts. We climb a wall to the far side and to a dumping compound of some kind. Piles of warm slag smoke fitfully on the frost-hardened ground, illuminated by the flare of fire from an anti-aircraft gun on the roof of the nearby forge house. A guardhouse stands at the gate and to the accessway beyond the forge, and we slip around it, keeping to the shadows before making our way to the surrounding fence. We duck into pools of darkness as a squad of Steel Legion troops pass, following their Chimera APC along the road. To our right, a spotlight springs to life. It points up into the air and reflects off the clouds. It's joined by others, and soon a dozen patches of light crisscross the night sky, occasionally showing up the silhouettes of large orc bombers. Flak and tracer fire streams in the sky as we cut through the fence and push through. But the bombers don't attack. They disappear from view as they head eastwards towards Acheron Hive. The colonel points left and we hurry on, leaping over abandoned sandbag barricades into empty gun pits and into the heart of Avernus, skirting along gantries over dormant fire pits. A misplaced shell explodes ahead of us, bringing down the wall of a brick outbuilding. We turn away as fire crews appear on a steam-driven tinder, and we pick our way along another route to our objective. The colonel leads us steadily north and east, taking a circuitous route to avoid contact with the defending forces. About half a kilometer inside of Avernus, a ruined refinery soars above the landscape, its chimneys and towers toppled, the maze of pipes and tanks now a dark warren of twisted metals and ruptured ferrocrete. "This is it," the colonel says, voice muffled by his rebreather. He waves us on. Something crunches under my foot, and I look down to see a half-rooted orc skull. Other remnants lie close by, alien and human, and it's obvious that the refinery has changed hands several times before. A twisted spire-like pumping tower leans precariously onto a bent network of high-level gangways. The colonel leads us toward it, signaling that we ought to enter the shattered building at his foot. Passing through, we see faces reflected in blank, cracked display screens. We step past overturned chairs and have to avoid cracked plates and mugs that have been dropped on the floor. We find ourselves at the top of a spiraling staircase that plunges deep into Avernus. The colonel pulls a small lantern from his pack and lights it with a match. Then he leads us down, pistol in his hand. 5 stories down, we come to another building. The colonel turns off to the stairs, ducking through a collapsed arch of a doorway. Beyond, we come to a room full of pipes and gauges, the pumping machinery long silent. The length of the chamber is dominated by a single massive pipe, twice the height of a man. Near to where it comes to the wall is a maintenance hatch. It creaks alarmingly as Ohebs winds it open. Shining his lantern inside, the colonel reveals the interior of the dark pipe. The sides are smeared with scum and residue, and the bottom of the pipe is slicked with a thin stream of slimy, thick fluid. The smell is acrid. It burns my eyes and lips, even through my gear. The colonel ducks and then steps into the hatch, his boots ringing dully on the thick corroded metal. Shine the lantern to the left, east toward Archeon. He waves us on. The air in the pipe is old and stale. It hangs with the cloying tastes of oil, but is purer than anything we've breathed since arriving on Armageddon. We take off the rebreathers, and we talk as we walk. It helps to break up the monotony of trudging kilometer after kilometer, day after day. We follow the bobbing glow of the colonel's lantern. After a kilometer or so underground, when it has cleared Avernus, the pipeline rises sharply and breaks out over ground into the ash wastes. Occasionally, the pipe takes a turn to the left or the right, or rises and dips over some obstruction. Here and there, battle has taken its toll, and the pipeline is ruptured. We have to don the rebreathers as we pass such sections, through which the light from outside blinks. Our feet scrape on the dust and ash blown in front of the wastes. As one, the pipeline is so mangled and torn by some huge explosion that we have to climb over the twisted remnants. We step out into the wastes from the shattered pipe to see Archeon, rearing up in the distance, about 30 kilometers away. Thousands of meters tall, it spears the sky like a dark spear. Okay. The upper spires obscured by the low toxic cloud. Flames burn from its ravaged shell, and there are still signs of heavy fighting as artillery batteries bombard its lower reaches. Like a giant stalagmite, it rises from the wastes, pocked with shuttle docks and entryways. Even at this distance, we can make out the smoke issuing from a million flues, and the haze rising and clogging the hive's upper reaches, adding to the smog that obscures its lofty pinnacle. Buttresses that house tens of thousands splay outwards, scarred and ravaged by shell holes and craters. The ferrocrete skin is worn by a millennia of erosion and a strangely flowing organic shapes. It looks like a massive fire ant mound, excreted up from the core of the planet. It reminds me of Olympus, my home. And not since fighting around the hives of Icar 4 have I felt so far from here. The pipeline starts again, less than 100 meters away, and I take every second to drink in the dark majesty of Archeon. I can imagine the thousands of factories within, millions of souls laboring in forges and mills, workshops and garages. The thump of engines, the clanging of hammers will be resounding through the hive city, the sounds of my childhood. Generations live and die without ever breathing air that has not been reclaimed for millennia, without drinking water that has not been the piss of 500 generations before. Most have never seen light except from a glow globe. Many of them don't even know such things exist. This could be the last sight of a hive I see in all of its glory, a great mound of humanity's industry with a life and personality of its own. In just 2 weeks, it might not be there. It might become like Hades, a ruined wasteland of craters, testament to the orbital fury of the Marines' malevolent. Those millions, no billions of souls exist in ignorance of the doom that hangs over them. They are condemned simply because it would be pointless trying to save them. So it was always been, and so it must be, for the Imperium does not count in millions or billions of lives. Such numbers are insignificant. What does the Emperor care? All seeing from the golden throne of Terra. If a billion souls die so that a world is held against the darkness, it is a mere drop in a sea among a million oceans. Armageddon must hold. I linger for a few seconds as the others clamber back to the pipe and continue on. I can't let Archeon die. If Archeon dies, then so could Gedi Hive on Olympus. No matter what has happened to me, or happened to me, I always felt sure that Gedi would live on. As old as the Imperium itself, enduring war, poverty, insurrection, and upheaval. The people change, regimes come and go, but Gedi will always be Gedi. Now, that might not be true. Perhaps even now it is a flaming pyre for 3 billion people, destroyed by orcs or Eldar. The Tau or the traitors of abyssal chaos. Perhaps the soldiers of the Emperor have obliterated it. If Archeon can survive, then so can Gedi, and part of what I am will last for eternity. A few kilometers on, in 5 days of walking, the pipeway dips sharply and heaps down into the rock beneath the ash wastes, towards the Archean underhive. We decide to rest for a few hours before making a concerted effort towards our goal on the next march. Everything is still down here, not even the wind brushing against the pipe to break the silence. I close my eyes, but sleep refuses to come. Hearing a scraping noise, I open one eye to see Brownie dragging his knife across his bald scalp, shaving off non existent stubble. I sit up, and he turns and looks at me. His eyes are white in his dark face, and they peer at me out of the gloom. Standing up, he shuffles past the sleeping form of Finn and sits next to me. Nearly 3, he says, his voice kept low, to avert disturbing the others. I nod, not sure whether I'm in the mood to talk or not. How long do you think it'll take to find him? Hard to say, I shrug. There have been guard regiments looking for him for almost a year now, without so much as a glimpse. Or so Finn reckons. And so how are we supposed to find him? He says with a frown. We could be here weeks, months, even years. It won't come to that, I say, and he looks at me sharply. How do you know? How do you know? What have you heard? The colonel always has a plan, I tell him. I bet he probably already knows where Von Strabb is. And if he doesn't, then he'll have a way of tracking him down in no time. You seem pretty confident, he says. Experience, I reply after a moment. The colonel's never failed. I'd never heard of him before he turned up at the prison tower, says Brownie, glancing up at the Schaefer's sleeping form. The colonel is lying on his back, with his head at his pack. The greatcoat is pulled to his chin like a blanket. He looks as still as a corpse, except for the shallow rising and falling of his chest. If he was such a hero, surely someone would know who he is, where he's from. Ever heard of a place called Typhus Prime? I ask, leaning closer. He shakes his head. How about False Hope, Cragmere, Deliverance? Nope. Never heard of any of them, says Brownie. Why? That's my point, I say. You don't hear about the colonel because he doesn't want you to know. Does anybody know exactly where he's been? What he's done? Perhaps Inquisitor Oriel and a few of his sideways friends do. Maybe the odd War Master or Sector Marshal. I don't know him from the next man. He could be the son of a Terran High Lord, or the bastard spawn of a pit slave for all I know. We once thought that perhaps he was a demon in the body of a man. Brownie laughs before casting a nervous glance at the others. That's a bit much, isn't it? He says. I saw him get his arm blown off by a plasma bolt, I tell him. Brownie looks over, seeing the colonel's arms crossed over his chest, like a body waiting to be interned in the coffin. They look normal enough to me, he says. Are you saying he's not human? Don't listen to him, says Lori, rolling over to the side on my left. The colonel's as human as you or me. Brownie can't stop himself from giving her a second glance. He is obviously looking at her, alabaster skin and pure white hair. Why? He said. Kage might have a point. Lori gives me a long, hard look, and I glance away, wondering what she knows. What did Oriel tell her about me? What about Ohebs, for that matter? Oriel knows or suspects that I'm a witch. Did he voice those suspicions to anyone else? Lori taps a finger onto her temple, and my heart skips a beat. Kage? Kage isn't quite there, are you, Kage? She says. I scowl at her. He's got a bit missing, cut out of him on the last mission. What's that got to do with the colonel? I ask, raising my voice. You thought there was something not right with him. A shadow looms over us in the yellow glow of the lantern. We look up to see the colonel standing over us, his face in shadow. His head turns to look at each of us, the whites of his eyes barely a slit. With the fingers of his left hand, he pulls off his right glove and holds his arm out. I expect to see the metal of an augmetic, but the skin is tough and wrinkled. Small hairs stand out from his wrist. He leans forward and waves it in front of my face. They grew a new one for me, he says, bending close. Who? Says Brownie, before flinching as the colonel turns. Tech priests, of course, he says, pulling his glove back on. It took 3 weeks of constant pain, feeling bone growing, new flesh knitting into old flesh, and the skin hardening under the glare of special lamps. You never mentioned it before, I say, and the colonel straightens up. Why would I? He says. You may fear and loathe the Inquisition, but they are powerful allies, and they have their uses. A new arm took a while, but not as long as it took them to rebuild my spine after I was crushed by a tank. He leans forward again, centimeters from me. Do you think I was born with these eyes, Kage? He says. A whisper sending a shiver down my spine. Even they cannot grow eyes. Did you know that? These were donated. Who was the donor? Lori asks in a hushed voice, peering at the colonel closely. Her hand unconsciously moves to touch him. A heretic who sinned against the machine god, Schaefer says. A mindless servitor now, with no need of eyes to monitor the power fluctuations of a plasma reactor aboard a starship. That is so fragged, I say, shaking my head. What else have they given you? He gives me a confused look. You make it sound like a punishment, the colonel says. Behind him, I see the others have woken up and are listening intently. Erasmus looks as if his eyes are going to burst. They're bulging so much. It is not a sentence, it is a gift. I have been kept alive for 6 times the natural span of a human. That's nearly 300 years. 3 centuries of service to the Emperor. 3 centuries of dedication. 3 centuries of cheating death and knowing nothing but war, suggests Lori, earning herself a bitter laugh from Schaefer. Life is war, Lori. You of all people should know that, he says. I was not created for battle like you, but in his wisdom, the Emperor has granted me a gift that is seldom seen. I have never failed, and as long as I live, I will never fail. What does that mean, you were created for battle? Asks Brownie, looking at Lori. What does that mean? Lori says nothing. She just grimaces at the colonel. What's the matter, Lori? Schaefer says. It is not a guilty secret to be ashamed. Not like some low-born lover to a governess. Tell them who you are and be proud of it. Her expression turns to one of sadness. She looks pleadingly at the colonel and steps back and looks away, arms crossed. She looks at the others and then at me. I was one of 500 brothers and sisters, she says, looking down, head bowed. We were bred from the seed of Mercurius himself in an incubator. We were fed on artificial stimulants and combat doctrine and had combat doctrine pumped straight into our minds. She fell silent, hands balled in the fists in her lap, her shoulders shaking in anger. They did what they could to make a perfect soldier, the colonel says without turning around. They took the seed of great Mercurius without his knowledge just before he died. For centuries, they labored in secret. Their goal shunned by the other tech priests. They did well considering 500 healthy babies were created out of 50,000 attempts. 5 companies of soldiers were raised from their unnatural births to fight. I'm the last one, says Lori, still gazing at the oil-slicked floor. Then she looks up, her eyes brimming with tears. She looks at me, and her anger returns. When Lauren died, I was the only one left. The tech priests understand the working of the body, even the mind, and the ways it can be manipulated, says the colonel. But they know nothing of the soul. In all their teachings, they forgot about one thing: faith. Faith in the emperor. So what happened to the others? I ask. You know, your company was all wiped out in an air attack. What happened to the other 4? Killed in battle, all of them, says Lori. On Icar 4, Methlessa, Lazarus. They were on their own, shunned by the others. Easy targets. We absorb this in silence. Then Dunmore stands up. Well, since you seem to be getting everything in the open, I have something to tell you, he says. Why do you think I'm called Brownie? And I'll let you guys figure that part out. I'll let you guys figure that part out. There's this thing that happens, and sometimes it happens successfully, but I think what Thorpe's trying to do is he's just like, he's taking the focus away from things that happen, and he's focusing more to things that are happening. Like things that happen, that's like a plot point, like a story. But things that are happening, like just things happen all the time. Like there's always, I mean, there's always things happening, right? That's the whole point. I mean, there's always things happening on Armageddon, but nothing's really happened yet. I mean, they're still just like, they just keep whispering to each other and trading secrets and stuff. And I never really cared. I never really cared about Lori's backstory. I guess it's cool that she is made from Lord Solar Materius, but that basically means she's like a clone or something. I'm not really sure exactly. Maybe not necessarily a clone, but something similar. So there's that. I don't care about Brownie's story. I don't. It just because the way they introduced it, I like. It just begs the question. Question begging doesn't work on me. Um. Yeah, I don't care about the backstories. But I believe what Mr. Thorpe is trying to do here, and I called him Thorpe earlier. I'm sorry about that, Mr. Thorpe. Is he's trying to like wear down the reader a little bit. It's filler, yes, but it's being used strategically. I will give him a pass. I'm not lamenting here. I'm explaining the process because I might end up doing this one day myself. Is he's sort of like giving enough like dulge roll details so that when something happens, like he can just like change the pace. And I guess that's kind of what's happening right now is the pace isn't so much, but the pace does change, and something does happen, and I think it's going to happen soon. It doesn't feel like any time has passed before shuffling off my feet and scraping awakes me. Shuffling of feet and scraping awakes me. I didn't realize just how dog tired I was. My brain still numb. I gather my gear together and fall in behind Kindrug. It doesn't take much to start walking, swinging one leg in front of the other. I focus on the buckle of Kindrug's back, a couple of meters in front of me. Why do I feel so lethargic? Looking past Kindrug's shoulder, I see that the others are stumbling and shuffling along too. We're all so tired, mindless zombies from the fatigue. My legs are cramping, and I can feel a pain in my chest every time I breathe in. The sores on my face throb. Blood dribbles down my cheeks and chin. I see the colonel sway slightly and reach out a hand to steady himself. The lantern drops from his fingers and clatters into the pale skin of oil gathered in the bottom of the pipe. That's when I realize there's more to this than just exhaustion. Rebreathers, I croak, but nobody seems to hear me. I'm sweating hard, my face is burning hot, and my hands greasy with perspiration. I stumble past Kindrug and grab the colonel. Gas! I manage to wheeze, pointing to the rebreather at Schaefer's belt. Bad air! He nods dumbly, but does nothing. I fumble for my own rebreather, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy, like fat sausages. I manage to pull on my rebreather. The filtered air fills my lungs. A few short breaths clear my head, enough to pull the colonel's rebreather free and slip it over his face. He waves me away as I help Kindrug with his. Slowly, like they're underwater or in zero grav, the rest of the team begins to pull on their masks, flailing with the straps and buckles. I haul off my pack and retrieve my goggles from a pocket. The filtered lenses blot out almost all of the light from the lantern, but the stinging stops almost immediately. Finn stumbles up to me, pointing desperately at his rebreather. Bending forward, I peer at his face and see a crack in the mask just under the nose filter. Ignoring my pack, I grab a hold of him and drag him forwards, past the colonel. I'm hoping that this gas pocket will come to an end shortly. Finn begins to convulse in my grasp. His fingers claw at my sleeve, and his feet kick out spasmodically as he tries to walk. I have to shoulder under his arm, half drag, half carry him along. The light of the lantern fades behind us as we plunge into darkness. Something cracks and crunches underfoot, and the floor becomes slippery. A couple of times the weight of Finn overbalances me, and we fall into a heap. As I struggle with him, I put my hand onto a soft, furry mass. Things writhe under my fingertips, and I snatch my hand back, gagging from the sensation. I pull us to our feet and hurry on quickly as possible. Part of me glad I can't see anything in the darkness. I'm not sure how much further we have to go, or how long he's got. Occasionally the pipeline bends without me noticing, and it's only as I slip on the sloping slides that I know we're changing direction. At one point, I feel a gust of air on the side of my face, and I turn and look but can't see anything. Perhaps there's a secondary pipe or some kind of vent. I consider stopping, hoping that it'll be bringing in fresher air. I stop myself, though, equally conscious that the toxins could be coming from there instead. I can't tell how much further we've gone, perhaps 2 desperate kilometers before Finn starts to calm down. I can't see him, so I risk pulling off my rebreather. I swallow a lungful of air, but it's the usual stale, bitter air of the pipe. I take off the orc hunter's mask, and he's gulping it in. He bends double, half hacking and coughing. He then slumps sideways, falling from my grasp, and I fumble along in the pitch black until my hands find him again. I dump myself next to him, both of us panting heavily, not able to spare a breath for words, as we sit in silence in the total darkness, hoping the others will catch up with us soon, hoping they're not all dead. It can't actually be more than a half an hour until we see a glow further up from the pipe, though it feels like half a day to us. There are definitely things in the darkness, creatures skittering past, brushing under my legs, scratching at my boots. As the light draws closer, I make out the colonel and the others close by him. He doesn't even give us a second glance as he walks past. Brownie dumps my pack at my feet and offers a hand to haul me up. Lori pulls up Finn. Noting his thanks, Finn falls into line. I pull on my pack and take up the rear, following behind Kindrug as he limps along. I think that's it for Finn. I think he's done for. The pipeline is teeming with rats that scurry underfoot and dart through a glow of the lantern into the darkness. Here, lower down the pipe, they swarm in front of us, hissing, screeching. Some of them are as long as a man is tall, their tails fat ropes of pink flesh. Many of the rats are misshapen, with hunched backs, bony protuberances, overlong fangs, which are covered in scabs and boils. They nip at our ankles here and there. The pipeline is cracked, and the rats hide in the shadows, their glittering eyes regarding us menacingly. They seem to plague Kindrug more than the rest of us. Perhaps they sense that he is wounded and the easiest prey. I have no doubt that had he strayed from the circle of light, they would have been on him as quickly as possible. I reckon any one of us would probably be easy meat, for that matter. The hunger of the rats only kept in check by their fear of our numbers. I figure it was the skeletons of those that had unwisely ventured in the gas pocket that we had been crunching through in the pitch black. After several hours, the rat population slowly begins to dwindle. We start to hear noises. The pipe shudders almost imperceptibly with a distant thumping. The rats here are leaner and more active than their cousins further up the pipe. As we march, the thumping becomes more pronounced and blends in with the sounds of other machinery, whirring and grinding. The colonel stops and shuts off the lantern for a while. As my eyes adjust, I detect a tinge of light from far ahead. It gets brighter as we walk, and I become steadily more aware of the clumping of our boots on the hollow metal of the pipe. I realize that it's no longer burrowing through the ground. Smaller pipes spring off from the main one, heading left and right, up and down, to different parts of our Acheron itself. The route branches into 2 pipes, roughly half the size of the one we stand in, and the colonel leads us to the left, stooping and shuffling through the much narrower space. It's not far, less than half a kilometer, and the pipe suddenly ends, opening out to a wide, low tank. Dropping to its bottom, we find ourselves knee-deep in thick, oily sludge that sucks at our boots. Dull light streams in from an open hatch in the roof ahead of us, and iron rungs, corroded and broken, stick out of the tank's wall. The colonel switches off the lantern, stowing it in Lori's pack, and signals for me to lead the way up the ladder. Poking my head out of the hatch, I find that we're in a high chamber filled with circular tanks arranged in a regular pattern over a ferrocrete store. Dust, centuries thick, lies over everything, stirred gently by large fans rotating slowly behind grills in the ceiling. There's no sign of life, so I pull myself out, readying my lasgun. We fan out across the room, securing the two wide doorways at either end, both barred from the inside with steel side locks. I look to the colonel for further instruction, but he just shakes his head and then points to the door next to me. We are inside the underhive, Schaefer says, keeping his voice low. From here, we'll have to establish our exact location and commence our search for von Strabb. Remember, there are two native underhivers, Imperial forces, von Strabb. Okay, reminder, there are the native underhivers, Imperial forces, von Strabb's Army of Liberation, and the Orcs, and none of them will necessarily be sympathetic to our cause. We must acquire suitable disguises at the earliest opportunity, and preferably a guide of some kind. We must not be discovered. He nods for me to slide back the bar to the door. It squeals as rust shakes off and drops into the dust. Kindrug puts a hand on the door and thrusts it open. It swings on noisily on corroded hinges, revealing another chamber, much like the one we're in, but filled with spherical tanks, ruptured from within. The floor is sticky with ancient chemicals. Flickering glow globes cast moving shadows over the gauges and control panels, and reflect off another doorway opposite. I scoot forward, my boots sticking to the tacky floor, holding my lasgun tight in grip. The others follow, spreading out to the left and right, picking their routes between the abandoned machinery. The glass in the gauges is cracked. The pipes between them are split and frayed, and a moss-like growth is spread over the tanks. Water reclamation, I say, quietly, remembering the parasitical algae that I was tasked with cleansing off the tanks when I was 4 years old. The next door swings open, with little noise. Its hinges have been recently oiled. Instantly, we're all alert, realizing that whoever oiled could be close by, perhaps living in the area. Ohebs points to the ground, and I glance down, seeing boot tracks in the grime of the floor. Behind me, Brownie whispers to Erasmus to repair the heavy stubber ammo, and he pulls out the bipod from its barrel, ready to drop down and give covering fire at a moment's notice. The roof is low, buckled inwards in places, sprouting coils of pipes and cables, covered with grills and hatches. We're on some kind of landing. A stairwell spirals up to the roof and drops down behind us. Another doorway opens up from the walls around us. Another one into darkness, while others are brightly lit. From below comes a flickering orange glow of flames. As we move to the stairwell, we can see the handrail is dotted with small spikes made from short nails crudely welded to it. Finn motions for us to stop, and he stalks forward, crouching. He bends down to look at the railing and then slips back. Tripwire, he says, running a finger along the fine wire string. Attached to what? The colonel asks. It's an alarm, not a booby trap. Everyone, watch where they tread. Okay, and they just sneak around a lot. Yeah, okay. He's older than me. I guess 35 years at least. His face thin, his premature wrinkles lined with grease and grime. His eyes are watery and weak. They are filled with tears from the pain. Like the others, he's dressed in breeches and jerkin, which is open to reveal a tight, wiry body tattooed with the same overlapping boxes that were found in the Sentry. His scarf is pinned in place, and gaudy brooches shaped as cogs and skulls. I hear the others making their way through the room and call out to them. Slinging my rifle over the shoulder, I offer him a hand and pull him to his feet. He stamps several times on the ground, trying to get his balls to settle properly. He is still bent over. What's your name? I ask him, as he looks at me with hate-filled eyes. Dear Flynn Carrick, he says. By the great Cog, who are you? We're your new best friends, I tell him, as the others gather behind me. Say hello to the